welcome to those of you who made it here for the session on textile recycling. We all know about household packaging, we know about batteries, we know about electronic waste. All of these are waste streams which are very much known to us via regulation, but also via fact-based recycling efforts. But there are new things coming up, and I think it's fair to say that textiles are a new kid on the block with a lot of potential over the next years and decades. And I'm very pleased to say that we have with us Louisa Hoyes, Business Development Manager at TOMRA for Textiles. She will take us through the current state of affairs across the textiles value chain and the solutions that exist to help close the loop. Louisa will then be joined by Toby Moss, who is Director of Business Development at Worn Again Technologies, who will speak about the current developments in textile recycling and touch on the roles of both chemical and mechanical recycling. Welcome to the two of you. I think we have excellent speakers. And with that, I give you the floor. Louisa, please.
Thank you, Wolfgang. I'm Louisa. It's very nice to be here. I'm going to talk to you. First, I will set the scene of the current situation for textiles at the moment. So here we can see on the graph, these are fibres that are produced to go into the textiles that we're making. So if we first look at the very first step, which the fibres that we are producing that will then be made into our clothing and textiles. In the last 20 years, the fibre production has almost doubled. So we can see there back in 2000, there was around 58 million tonnes of textile fibres produced that were going into making our textiles. And in 2021, we had 113 million tonnes of fibres going in to be produced for textiles. So we've seen a huge increase in just the last 20 years of fibres being produced. We can see there the majority of fibres that are being produced to go into textiles are fossil fuel-based polyester fibres. It's more than 50%, it's around 58% of fibres being produced are from polyester. And then followed by that, around 26% is from cotton fibres. So the majority of fibres being produced to make our clothing are from either polyester or from cotton. And then there's some smaller fractions of fibres being produced, man-made cellulistic fibres, some natural fibres like silk and wool. But it's predominantly either fossil fuel-based polyester or natural resource cotton. We can also see that with the huge increase in cotton being produced, or cotton fibres being produced, the production of cotton globally has not matched that increase. So we're using a lot more cotton, but not much cotton is being produced. So we have a huge increase in the amount of fibres that we're making. Then, once we've gone from the fibre production, these are the textiles, once they've been produced into clothing. This is the global textile flow, or global clothing flow. So we can see here, of all of the textiles that are being produced and made into clothing, what we see here is a very linear value chain. So we can see around, or more than 97% of the fibres being produced are from virgin feedstocks. So there's very little recycled fibres going in there. On the top left, we can see there's 2% of fibres are actually from recycled sources, but we know now that that's typically using PET bottles to go into polyester, which we know PET bottles should have their own circular closed-loop value system. So it's a very intensive virgin feedstocks going into our clothing, and then we can see a very linear value chain of what's happening to our global clothing as they go through the process. So we have approximately 12% losses in those fibres, and that's through the production of them. So production waste, for example, we're losing those materials there. And that's typically ending in landfill or incineration. We have 0.5 million tonnes of microfibre, typically from our polyester. The first wash of your polyester is leading to 0.5 million tonnes of microfibre in our oceans. We can see here 75% of the fibres that we're producing is ending directly in landfill or incineration. There's no collection for that material, and it's a very linear take, make, waste. I believe I've seen a recent study that actually puts this more around 85% now. If we think of between 100 to 150 billion items of clothing being produced per year, approximately 85% of those that we're producing per year will end directly in landfill or incineration. So automatically they are out of the value chain and they're a waste product. There's no chance to recover them. If we then go round the value chain, we can see that 12% of our clothes that are produced are downcycled. So where we do have the option to capture and collect those waste textiles, they're going to be made into lower grade applications. So that's, for example, they will be shredded, they will go into insulation or wiper shoddy. So they're not going into high value circular recycling loops. We can see here on the top left that less than 1% of the clothes that we produce now are circular. So less than 1% of the textiles that we waste will go back into being new textiles again. And that's what the whole value chain now is looking at, shifting from this very linear value chain into a new circular economy for textiles. If we look at Europe, we produce approximately 7 million tonnes of textile waste per year in Europe. 2/3 of the textile waste that we produce in Europe is ending directly in household waste, which is destined for landfill or incineration. Of the 1/3 that we do collect, its collection systems are typically set up for reuse. So they will collect the textiles, they will manually sort out what's reusable, and then of course you still have a waste fraction there, and that will typically go into a downcycling lower grade application. So we can see what's clear here is we need to increase the collection rates to make sure that we're collecting all of the textiles that we're wasting, and then also focus on a collection for both reusable and recyclable. So how do we do that? How do we go from this very linear value chain to a new circular economy for textiles? These are TOMRA's 6 steps to circular. So we believe for a product or for a material to be circular, it needs to fulfill each of these 6 steps. So it needs to be made in a way that's circular, it needs to be made for longevity, it needs to be designed to last. And it also needs to be designed with recycling in mind. So once it's really got to that point that it cannot be reused again, it needs to be recyclable. The second step would be to sell that product in a way that is sustainable, to sell that product in a way that is good for the circular economy. And there we can look at things such as extended producer responsibility, where the producer of that material will be responsible for what happens to that material at the end of its life. Within extended producer responsibility, you can also look at things like eco-modulated fees, in which the producer will be incentivized to make sure that that product is made in a sustainable way. So the fee for a pure cotton material that is designed to last long will potentially be cheaper than the fee for producing a blended material that's low quality, that's not going to last very long. Then we can also look at the consume. How are we consuming these materials? How are we consuming textiles? And there it comes into the kind of fast fashion that we hear a lot about today. Overconsumption of cheap textiles. And I do believe we're seeing that now as well. We're seeing the shift. We've seen it with plastics, and we're now seeing it with people wanting to be more environmentally friendly, more sustainable with what they're consuming. Then we get into the collect. And as I mentioned, we're only collecting in Europe 1/3 of the textiles we're wasting. So 2/3 is not even being collected. So we can look at a shift in collection systems. How can we ensure that we are collecting all of the textile waste that we're wasting? And then we move into the sort and recycle, and that's really where we're seeing some really exciting new innovations in technology. And we need to ensure that we are collecting that waste textile, we're sorting it and making sure that it can provide a high quality feedstock to go into the new recycling technologies. We have Toby here that will jump in a bit later to talk exactly about how we recycle textiles. But I would say in the last 12 to 18 months, we've really seen an increase in new innovations in startup technology to develop recycling technology, both chemical and mechanical, to take in those waste textiles and fibre to fibre recycle them so that they can close the loop and go back into new textiles in the future. what are the most important things to consider when we're looking at this new closed loop for textiles? How do we get there? We've seen what we need to do to get there, the 6 steps of circularity. And I believe these are the really 3 key pillars of building this new circular economy for textiles. We need legislation, so a shift in legislation that ensures that textiles are collected. We have the new Waste Framework Directive in the EU that will call for mandatory separate collection of textiles by 2025. So it's a shift to making sure that we must collect the textiles. There's also the EU Waste Framework Directive, the Sustainable Strategy for Textiles that was released in March this year, and it set out a transition pathway, the legislation towards this circular economy for textiles, and within that there were things like a harmonised EPR across Europe for textiles, the banning of destruction of unsold goods, including textiles, the banning of export of textile waste unless the country that is receiving that textile waste can prove that they have the technology and the ability to manage that waste, so that we're not then seeing piles of our textile waste dumped in countries that we've exported. So there is a shift towards legislation to capture and recycle textiles. We also need advanced technology and advanced infrastructure. So we need a new infrastructure for collecting textiles, and we need a new scaled infrastructure to collect, auto-sort and recycle, which, like I mentioned, we're seeing new technologies developing, and now we just need to bring that whole new value chain together. So make sure that the collectors, sorters, recyclers are all collaborating together. And that brings me on to the last point, collaboration. We're building a completely new value chain here that hasn't existed before. So everybody along the new value chain really needs to collaborate. We need to understand what kinds of textiles we're collecting, how we sort those, what kind of feedstock specification requirements recyclers need. So we all need to be sharing information to build this new circular economy for textiles. And after legislation, I believe this is one of the biggest pushes and the biggest drivers to circular textiles in the future. We're seeing big brands now starting to make commitments to having recycled content in their future garments. So the H&Ms, the Inditex, including Zara, they're starting to announce that they will have a requirement of this much recycled polyester in their garments in the future. But at the moment, we don't have the economy that's not set up at the moment. So we really need to scale and bring this together. And I think the driving force behind big brands making these commitments is one of the greatest pushes towards this new circular economy. At the moment, there is very little recycled feedstock available to go into these clothes in the future. So brands need to ensure that this value chain is successful and is set up. So we're collecting waste textiles, we're sorting them, and we're recycling them, and they're not ending in household landfill and incineration. And then I will hand over to Toby, who will introduce himself and talk a bit more about the recycling technologies that we're seeing. Thanks, Toby.
Thanks, Louisa. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. So I'm Toby Moss, Business Development Director at Worn-Again Technologies, and we're a chemical recycling company. We've been active actually since 2008 and have been developing our technology in lab environments since 2012, and I'll speak to some of the scaling activities that we're currently undergoing. So I wanted to start with what's today's state of the sorting market, and just to indicate how the business model of the whole sorting market really needs to shift gears if we're going to significantly increase the level of both collection and sorting for recycling that's occurring. So predominantly today, sorting activity is done by hand, and the purpose of the activity is for reuse. About 50% of the material that comes into a sorting facility is sorted for reuse. You can see there's on the right hand side of this slide, I'm showing the different values and also the different volumes of material that come through these sorting facilities. So the very best quality of sorted material is called the cream in industry jargon, and this is the the occasional Gucci bag or something of a very high luxury standard that comes through these sorting facilities on a highly infrequent basis. This is about 40% of the revenue of a sorting facility. And so very small changes in that volume can make or break the entire business model. Predominantly, the material that's coming through the facility is of a much lower value. And you can see that the next segment, which is actually currently the biggest segment, is the material that I've got here that's for export. And so in a European environment, you would see the most modern developed economies exporting to some of the more developing economies in European context, and also then exporting to the developing world, mostly West Africa and South Asia, where again it goes through another sorting step, and unfortunately about 60% of the material that arrives in those locations goes directly to landfill. So we've then got the next two or three segments of what's being sorted, and this is about 40% of what's coming into the facility. That's called the non-rewearable fraction, and today predominantly a lot of that material is going into a downcycling application. So it would be clothing, for instance, that is shredded and goes into, let's say, insulation, or making soundproofing for these types of settings. We've then got a 10% approximately of material that's going directly to incineration. So this would be textiles that, for instance, rags that are soaked in oil, or it could be contaminated with biological waste or something like that, where it's very difficult to recycle that. So that's going directly into a waste fraction. And then, as Louisa mentioned, less than 1% is currently going back into a textile application. If we're successful in seeing some of the regulatory change and the legislation move forward to basically force more European states to be collecting material, what we can expect to occur is this non-rewearable fraction to significantly increase. So it will become the dominant fraction within the sorting facility, and without sufficient investment in recycling technologies like ours and sorting technologies like TOMRA's, that will remain a relatively low value stream, and it will put the companies that are currently involved in sorting under severe financial stress. So this model just is not scalable, and it needs to change, and it needs to change with investment and maturity of larger players bringing technologies to the market. This is a visualization of what we expect a sort of sorting facility of the future to look like, and you can see that it's basically flipped on its head the model that we had on the previous slide. The rewearables fraction on this slide is very tiny, and the non-rewearables fraction is rather large, and that's what we expect a modern sorting facility to look like. What would be the purpose of this sorting facility? It would be to make sure that we're getting materials sorted predominantly into material fractions, so they're available and ready for mechanical and chemical recyclers to come in and make new fibers out of those materials. So for instance, you would have a pure polyester stream, you would have a polycotton blended stream, you would have a pure cotton stream, a nylon stream, and wool and other materials. And that's the type of technology that TOMRA has been working on and deploying at a scale in Europe already, which is really, really quite promising. In terms of Worn Again, what do we do as a company? So we're very much focused on the big chunk of the non-rewearable market, and mostly that is the pure polyester and the polycotton blended materials. So this is a visualization showing some data that we worked with in a Western European sorting facility, and we took the non-rewearable fraction, which is about 45% of this facility's throughput, and we did some near-infrared scanning of the materials that were available in that fraction, and about 40% of those were pure polyester, polycotton blends or polycellulose blends. And that's exactly what Worn Again's technology is to do. We use special solvents to dissolve the polyester and the cotton and separate those and regenerate new polyester resin and cellulosic pulp for making back into new fibers. Here I've got a slide showing what an ideal circular textiles economy would look like incorporating Worn Again's technology. And you can see that the consumer is over in the top right of this slide. Once they're done with their clothes, they've effectively reached their end of life. You know, for a company like Worn Again, that's basically the start of the material's life. But it goes into a collection bin. It would then be sorted through a sorting facility. The rewearable fraction would be removed and sent back to the brands and the retailers and the thrift shops for them to sell back on. And then the non-rewearable components would go through an advanced sorting by fiber composition facility, the type of technology that TOMRA has been working on. We as chemical recyclers then need to receive the material in a shredded format, because if you're taking something that is a dry garment and putting it into a wet chemical process, you need a consistent size of material so that you can efficiently get the chemicals onto the textiles. So I wanted to show this because it's a demonstration of how mechanical recycling and chemical recycling really do need to work together instead of this binary choice between is this good for mechanical or is it good for chemical. We need, as chemical recyclers, we need mechanical recycling to exist at scale so that we have sufficient feedstock that's of our specification for the chemical process. So the material comes into a Worn Again facility. This would be polycotton material or pure polyester material, and then we would separate those. So we would take the polyester and the cellulose out, and then they would be available for fiber manufacturers to use in the traditional way that they make textile fibers, and thereby substituting the need for virgin oil extraction and cotton farms and trees for man-made cellulosic fibers. So where are we at? As a company, we've basically finished the science phase, if you like, of our development. So we've been working at a lab scale for the last 10 years. 3 years ago, we built a very small pilot plant in the UK, and that meant that we were able to process tens of kilograms of material, having the ability to process maybe tens of grams of material in a lab environment. And that really gave us the confidence to move to the next level of scale. And that's where we move beyond what's really a scientific risk into an engineering risk. And we're now building a demonstration facility in Switzerland, which will be able to process 1,000 tons per annum of material. So semi-industrial, but of a significant scale where we can show what a Worn Again chemical plant would really look like. In the future, we expect to use that demonstration facility to attract operators to come and see our technology and then make an investment in a much larger scale commercial operation. And these operations would be of a scale greater than 50,000 tons per annum each of feedstock. And this is kind of what we need to really make a big dent on the circularity challenge that we've got as a European continent. Just show this quickly to say that we've announced where we're going to build the facility, and we've raised some funds from our shareholders to build that facility. And we've also formed a collaboration with 9 companies and Swiss Textile Exchange, which is the Textiles Trade Association in Switzerland, as the foundation for this project. So these companies sit across the value chain, and they'll be involved in providing feedstock, engineering of the facility, and also the output of the materials and using those to spin back into fibers. So thanks very much for your time, and I think we're now going to take some questions.
Yes. Thank you very much, Toby. Thank you very much, Louisa. I really think this shows that we are entering a new material stream. There was not that much talk about textile recycling yet, and these kind of presentations show us what is ahead. Very, very interesting. Do you have any question? We know there are a lot of talks and discussions between chemical recycling and mechanical recycling when it comes to household packaging waste and all of that, and fierce debates, what is better or worse, all of that. I mean, you are at the very beginning of textile recycling, and you are, of course, speaking on behalf of a company which does chemical recycling. Do you see also a role for mechanical recycling here, and how do you see the split, if that is possible at all to predict at the current moment?
But yeah, very much so. I think if it's and quite often these questions are sort of portrayed as if there is a real binary choice, but we know that doesn't exist, and each geographical location is going to have their own markets where it makes sense to do one or more of the other, and you can see before that I showed that we need mechanical recycling to exist at scale for us to have sufficiently a large volume of materials to chemically process. So, as chemical recyclers, we need that to exist. But the other thing is mechanical recycling is probably higher up on the waste hierarchy. So if you can do mechanical recycling, you should do that first. Because that's what you're required to do from a European perspective. We just think that mechanical recycling is not going to be able to facilitate all of the recycling that's needed to get up to significant levels of circularity, and that's where chemical recycling needs to come in and deal with those materials where it's not possible really to mechanically recycle. Like the blended materials, for instance, is a fantastic example of that. Most mechanical recyclers will need 98% plus of a particular monofiber in their feedstock to get a significant quality of mechanically recycled fiber. So that's where we think that chemical recycling has its has part to play.
Thank you. Very, very clear. Louisa, I'm sure you're talking to brands as well, to H&M and Adidas and what have you, and all of them. What is the mood there? Are they nervous? Do they see things like EPR coming? Do they want to be ahead of the curve, or do they say, let's wait and see and put our feet on the ground and save some money until we really have to do something, and let's do some greenwashing in the meantime? Or are there really some front runners who want to get going now?
Yeah. Good question. Definitely, brands are really engaging with this whole new circular. It's their product, it's their material that they're putting onto the market. So I believe they're definitely feeling the heat from legislation, but also from consumer awareness. This new shift towards the consumer awareness of sustainability, wanting to be eco-conscious, wanting to have a sustainable product. I think greenwashing has played a huge part of that. Brands for the last 5-6 years have been able to greenwash, which means they have produced their clothes and they have marketed their clothes in a way that to the consumer it would seem that they are environmentally friendly, but actually the claims that they've been putting on their textiles they've been false. So they've been saying we have an eco-conscious range of this material, or this is a sustainable product, but actually there's been no data behind that. And up until very recently, they've been able to do that, but now it's come into light, and they will not be able to greenwash in the future. So there will be a lot more stricter regulations against claiming that you are producing an environmentally friendly material. So that's one aspect of it. Another, of course, is the legislation. So there is focus now on making sure that we collect this material, because people are also more environmentally aware. They are going to be looking for, is there recycled content in the textiles? And like I showed the slide earlier, there's a commitment to having a recycled fibre in your future garments. But at the moment, there is very little or no recycled fibre available to use. So they will really need to drive this whole shift. They will really need to move to set up this new value chain, or else they won't be able to have garments in the future using recycled content. And we're definitely seeing that these big brands are investing in this whole new value chain. They're investing in new recycling technologies. They're looking at sorting technologies, and they're really coming together to ensure that this new circular economy will set up and will scale fast.
Clear. So let me ask you one final question to the two of you. What, in your opinion, is the biggest hurdle which needs to be overcome to scale this up? Is it investment? Is it legislation? Is it consumer awareness? Is it all of it together? Or is there one thing which sticks out? Or is it this? If we break this, then the train moves even faster? A question to the two of you.
Well, I think there's sufficient investment there. Like there's clearly a lot of the brands are investing. They've invested in us. There's a lot of interest from the brands. Even traditional funding markets for startups. There's a lot of activity with venture capital, and every week we see tens of millions of dollars worth of investment going into companies that are our peers. So there's certainly enough investment that's there and dry powder ready to invest in larger scale facilities. I think there's a hesitance from investors when it comes to what's our feedstock market, and they can't yet see sufficient developments going on there. But I think it's there's some green shoots. We've seen Eurotex recently with commissioning the report from McKinsey, where they've predicted that there needs to be 180 new textile sorting facilities, these recycling hubs across Europe, and up to $8 billion worth of investment. That's really positive for the industry because it shows that there's some kind of pathway to us getting to a higher level of circularity. And I think it probably also gives the legislators the right signals in terms of how they need to help the market to grow. One of the big challenges, and I think this is something that the TOMRA technology overcomes, is that most sorting facilities today are not running at 100% because they can't get the staff to actually man the manual sorting tables. Because what happened during COVID is it was a typical feast to famine type of behavior where everybody was working from home. They all just threw out their clothes, had a big spring clean at the start of COVID. And so the sorting facilities were overwhelmed, and then, 2 years of nothing. And collection rates plummeted to the point where they had to, have pretty major financial restructuring. And as a result, their teams have reduced by half. And now that we're seeing, post-pandemic behavior pick up again, they're really struggling to get people to come back into these sorting facilities. So I think we need more automated sorting facilities and investments in those. And it's fantastic to see, flagship projects like the one that you have in Malmo kind of leading the way, because it shows investors, it shows companies that are probably going to come in and buy our technology that there is a way to get the feedstock.
Thank you, Toby.
Yes, I feel like it's a combination of everything, like you said. What we're doing is setting up a completely new value chain. It hasn't existed before. We've had collection of textiles, but it's typically been collection for reuse. We haven't collected for recycling, and we haven't had high value recycling of textiles fibre to fibre. So we're really setting up a completely new value chain. So I think everything that's incorporated in that, building a completely new infrastructure for collection, we're seeing new technologies, just building this whole new infrastructure, and everything that's incorporated into that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. But in my 3 pillars on the slide, that's where it comes that collaboration will really be key. We won't succeed in this new circular economy for textiles unless we really have collaboration along the whole value chain, so we can understand what your feedstock specification requirements are, which tells us what we need to sort. We need to talk to the collectors to understand how do you collect, what material do you have after you've collected that's available to fibre recycling. So yeah, it's really this completely new value chain and uncharted territory for textiles, which, yeah, is exciting. There are hurdles, but it's exciting.